Good evening, everyone. It's time for a sunset chat, taking you from sunset to sundown here tonight. And let's talk about some interesting things. This is not going to be a filler video, unlike last night's. I think I have some interesting subject matter, such as uh, my background. I know I've been teasing my privileged background, as I like to call it, and so I don't know. I'm nervous to share it because and this ties into something I've been seeing on another content creator's site that talks about like how like I think people on the left are rightfully obsessed with like how do we get young men back if if the Democratic Party got just like half of the men that used to vote for them, I think they would be winning probably fairly regularly. So it's worth thinking like how do we get young men back and how did they all fall so hook line and sinker for far right fascism or fascism adjacent ideology. So granted, keep in mind I'm 45 years old, so the world I grew up in is long gone. I grew up in a state that had a feminist democratic female governor. And no, I did not grow up in New England. I grew up in Texas, and that was true from the years 1990 to 1994. When I was in high school, the state of Texas had Ann Richards, the Democratic, self described feminist female governor. And I have to think they're one of the first states that had that. There weren't many women governors as early as the 90s, and it's just like the sad irony of our times that the state that sort of pioneered that is also now like the most reactive, reactionary, fascist state, which is a large part of the reason why I left several times, but then kept getting sucked back in, as people tend to do when you have relatives in various places. All my relatives are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I grew up in a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth. I don't know if I want to say the name of it, but I'll just say it's on the north side of Dallas. If you go straight north of Dallas, about 20 miles, that's where I mostly grew up. I was not born there, though. I'm not a native Texan. In a way, I like to say I'm a modern carpetbagger, at least a 1980s version. I was born in upstate New York, just north of Buffalo, Niagara Falls area, in a small little village called Lewiston, literally on the Niagara River. If I was born half a mile, not even half a mile, I'm going to say like 1,000 feet west, I would be a Canadian. So I was so close. No, actually, I like the fact I'm an American. I think if I want, I think about going to Canada a lot recently, and I have every right. I have every reason to really. Right, I'm a trans woman. I have a disability, more than one actually, and like the United States is just not a country built for me at all. Finally finding this out at age 45 after torturing myself for the last 25 years of adulthood, wondering why I wasn't succeeding, why I'm not getting anywhere, why do I have no friends, why do I have like no social standing whatsoever, despite being what I thought was a cis white male for the vast majority of that time. I've only been transitioning to be a woman over the last 2 years. That late 2023 is when my egg cracked, so to speak, and I realized I was not a man at all. I'm definitely a woman. So putting some makeup on here, so maybe that'll get some more views on my flagging station here channel, my flagging channel that is getting like 10 views a video if I'm lucky. But I do, well, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do it for the views, but also because I like doing this. And so back to the subject of Texas. So I ended up in Texas at 3 years old. I didn't like it from the start. We left Niagara Falls area of New York, where almost like my entire dad's side of the family was living. So like my grandparents, I was really sad to leave my grandparents, my dad's parents' side. And I don't know. I never felt like I liked Texas right from the start. Like it just didn't. I was only 3, but I know I remember some sadness around doing that and being in Texas at first. And So yeah, I mean, my sixth sense was right even back then. So the reason we ended up there was because my mom worked for a major airline that moved their headquarters to just right next to DFW Airport. In They actually moved the headquarters in 1979. We ended up moving there in 1983. So um, it was a different place though back then. Especially now that I've read that book From Cotton Belt to Sun Belt, about the transformation of the South economically from 1935 to 1980. That pretty much tells exactly where it pretty much ends up, like right when I became a Texan slash Southerner, more or less against my will. And it was a region that caught up economically to the rest of the country extremely late, but it caught up quickly because of the New Deal booming the technology based industries that the South started specializing in: aerospace, technology, telecommunications, and research and development. For example, even though Apple is in the Silicon Valley, it's safe to say that they benefited from the southern states' benefits of the New Deal. And then what later on became like this government cash cow for the southern states. They got money from the federal government, and even though they're so against like any kind of assistance, they were more than happy to take that when they had complete control over how it was spent. Anyway, back to my story. So this was the South I found myself in as a 3-year old and then growing up in. It tried to be more like the rest of the country back then. It wasn't like now where it's like it's so obvious that they don't like being an American, even though they have a fetish over the fact that they are American. It's like a bastardized version of being an American. This applies to the entire South, but especially Texas and Florida, probably to a lesser extent. I did live there as well, and I'll get to that later, maybe in another video, but we'll see. And yeah, where am I going with this? So yeah, we moved to Texas. My mom had a job as a flight attendant. My dad was unemployed, but very quick, probably about like, he got a job as a sales representative selling like golf clubs. Um, First, he was independent. Later on, he became like a corporate employee of this company that he sold golf clubs for primarily. So he sold golf clubs in this pretty upscale suburb that I grew up in. There was a country club there that had just opened. It was brand new in like 1985. So my dad was at that point was selling golf clubs professionally and golf equipment. So we joined this country club. So at this point, we were like, even though we weren't rich, I mean, I think my dad made a good business decision to do that because he had to be close to his potential customers. They had a golf course, of course, tennis courts, swimming pool, and my dad became very successful. Like when we moved to Texas, we were not rich at all. Flight attendants were very modestly paid back then too, no different than now. So we became like a pretty solid upper middle class family by the end of the 1980s because this area that I grew up in was, well, when we moved there, it had 30,000 people. And let's say by the year 2000, when I pretty much left, like I was gone at that point, I was gone at college, but it had grown to like probably about 250,000 at that point, people. And today in 2025, it's got pretty close to 300,000, perhaps more. And so this is what I guess I consider my hometown. I mean, I graduated from high school there, and it was essentially just like this sleepy, mostly farmland, suburban community north of Dallas. Everybody would commute to work in downtown Dallas every day down Central Expressway, US Highway 75, which is still there. It just has a lot more lanes now and traffic. But um, so, I mean, it was a decent childhood as far as it went. Like I never, and my parents were so lucky to have stable employments. I have only known my parents to ever have one job as long as I've been alive. As long as I was alive, my parents had, well, other than my dad being kind of like working in the family grocery store in Niagara Falls when I was born, and then eventually moved, when we moved to Texas, he got the job at the golf company. So other than that, my dad never had to find a job after 1983, and my mom hasn't had to find a job since 1976, and that's 4 years before I was born. So that alone is just so fortunate that I had that in my childhood, because it's no secret that as early as the 80s and 90s, like downsizing became the new buzzword for corporate America. That was the first time everyone downsized, especially in the recession of the early 90s that hit the whole country, but especially Texas. That was like back during the savings and loan crisis, as they called it. I don't remember the exact specifics, but that really depressed the Texas economy a lot, like late 80s, early 90s, but it quickly recovered, as it always does, especially there. And so, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a place where I had a situation where I never had to worry about money. Did I get everything I ever wanted? No. But if this tells you anything, my brother and I, my brother who's 2 years younger than me, we had a Sega Master System game collection that was like we had probably about 100 games at some point. So like, yeah, some of that was from our like allowance money, but I mean, that's just, if we wanted things, like most of the time we would get it. Like we didn't have to. I mean, they would say no. My parents would say no a lot too. Don't get me wrong, but generally we got what we wanted, and we never had to worry about, like, we didn't have to suffer from want, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt's four freedoms would call it, the freedom from want. I had that as a child. I haven't had it as an adult, no, at all. But as a child, I was free from want, which is good, because when you're a child, you can't do a whole lot about it. You're totally dependent on your parents' economic situations. So yeah, my dad did really well at his job. I mean, he was like a born salesman, and so yeah, by the let's say by the mid '90s, we were pretty solid upper middle class. We moved to a bigger house that uh, just was in like, I don't want to call it a rich neighborhood, but it was definitely like upper middle class, because the houses were 2 stories, and every house had a swimming pool. Like that was the main difference. Our first neighborhood was just a single story house, no pool, and that was it. So, uh, so I grew up. Yeah, I grew up fine. Like everything fine. I say fine, but prosperity wise, it was fine. But you know, just because I had things prosperity wise doesn't mean I had a good childhood in other ways. Like I was never understood. I think in a lot of ways I just didn't, my parents didn't know how to raise me. Like I wasn't really born to the right family, I think. And they did the best they could. I can't fault them. But even to this day, I mean, they are still both alive, fortunately. And uh, they just, they just don't understand me now at all, like, especially now that I'm trans, and they were really surprised and shocked. My mom less so, because I think, I can't prove this, but I think there were some instances in my early childhood that indicated that I wanted to be a woman, and I have to imagine that my parents, but especially my dad, wanted to suppress that, because it was not okay to be like that in 1983, 84, 85, especially in like a suburban area in Texas. So yeah, so I just suppressed that for so long, and I think in a lot of ways that, well, like they say, a lot of Republicans are suppressing something. They're either like closet homosexual, or in my case, like closet transgender. I was so closeted, so suppressed. I didn't even realize it till I was 43 years old. And I had been married for about 3.5 years when I discovered it. And basically had to suffer like a hellscape of years from 2020 to 2023, including layoffs and pay cuts, massive pay cuts, and uh, just awful mental health that I'm still recovering from. All of that had to happen to break down, to destroy whatever ego I had. And when it was just, when my ego was zero and destroyed and in pieces, my transgender was, my being transgender was all that was left. And that's the only way I realized it. I think that's how buried it was. That's what had to happen. So I was raised Republican. I mean, I'm pretty sure like my dad has never voted Democratic. Even when we weren't yet really successful, I just don't, my dad came from a family that owned a grocery store, a famous grocery store in Niagara Falls, New York. And that's where he worked when I was born. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is that he came from a family that owned a business, and business owners always have tended to be Republicans. He was never a union member, and my mom was never, um, she was a union member as a flight attendant. And, but I'm pretty sure she came from the more, the kind of Northern Republican stock of the 1940s and 50s, before the party became extremely Southernized, post like Barry Goldwater, 1964, and especially with Nixon. But in general, my mom was not all that political. She didn't really have an opinion. Back then the parties were not so divided, and there were conservative Democrats and there were liberal Republicans. Now that's not the case. So yeah, I mean, I was raised Republican. I don't know what it was. I think, when you live in a southern state like Texas, the propaganda is, they're so good at what they do. I mean, they've been honing that skill since the days of slavery. They've been, if you lived in Texas like in 1855, you would be inundated in the newspapers of like how slavery is a good thing and how the North is trying to take it away from us. Those damn abolitionists in Massachusetts they think slavery is evil, and we gotta like defend ourselves. And and to this day, like that's a large reason I think why there's a lot of Texans that I think they would be Democrats if they were not inundated with this propaganda and they weren't surrounded by people that regurgitated this propaganda everywhere. Because I know how it is in that state, and it's very easy to start sympathizing with Republican and now like fascist ideals when it surrounds you all the time and there's no opposition. Texas is basically a one party state now. If you're not a Republican, you may as well not even really participate. And that's how they like it. They've been a one party state going back to before the Civil War. I mean, that's kind of how when the Civil War started, it was a one party, the South was a one party state. The Democratic Party was everything. The Whigs had totally disappeared and nothing really replaced it afterwards until after the Civil War. And yeah, the 80s and 90s, Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area in particular, was very business progressive, like almost like Whiggish. There's no, the Whigs don't exist anymore. They were a party up until about 1855, but they were a party that believed in the government helping the people and funding like projects to like improve the national infrastructure and pay for things that couldn't be done privately. That was the South, like post New Deal, post World War II. They took all the handouts in the world when it was for developing their industries. Highways, interstate highways basically came about because of the South. The condition of the roads in the South were abysmal until the 1950s. Like they were so bad because no state wanted to pay for that. The rich people didn't need those roads so much as the people of more modest means. So yeah, the interstate highway system is what allowed the South to boom and become what it is today. And that was all paid for by the federal government. So, long story short, I know this is like not groundbreaking information. We've known for a long time that red states take in a lot more money from the federal government than the blue states. The blue states are like they pay in, the red states take out. That's still true today. So, where am I going? Well, I was Republican because I just didn't know any better, and like everyone around me was a Republican, and I just didn't question. I was generally an obedient kid who trusted the people around me and didn't question things at all. Like I now looking back at it, I wish I feel now the way I did back then because a lot of that was totally naive and misguided. Like I never once questioned that I should go to college. It was just going to happen. Luckily, I discovered a field that I was extremely passionate about, and that kept me motivated to do it. I don't know how I would have gotten through college if I just had to do something like study business. And I wasn't into the humanities yet as much as I became now, like in the last 5 to 10 years, with history, especially writing, art, and but yeah, if I didn't have my obsession with like airlines and aviation and flying airplanes at that age in my late teens, I don't know how I wouldn't have gone down an extremely dark path. I fortunately I was so privileged that I could go to a college devoted to flying airplanes and like engineering that was extremely expensive. There was a private university in the state of Florida, so that's where Florida comes in. I spent about for the better part of 5 years in the state of Florida in the north central part, and so I learned a lot about Southern culture there. It wasn't Miami where it was much more cosmopolitan and almost like an outpost of South America. I was up towards Daytona Beach, which was only about an hour south of Jacksonville, and that's where Florida becomes southern. Orlando was not that way. Orlando is more like the major cities in Florida are like the major cities in Texas. They are much more just like the rest of the country. So, but I think what I'm getting at is like I was extremely privileged, and that's what it took for me to avoid going down whatever dark path I would have gone down in the late 90s, early 2000s if I didn't have the means to pursue my passion at that time. If I had to just like not fly airplanes because I didn't have the resources, or I grew up in a home that was so resource scarce that I never had time to like develop my interests and my passions, which is definitely also a problem. I don't know what I would have done, but the problem is these days, like that's more and more the case. Um, Young men are growing up in homes with no resources. They get to college age or the age of just okay, what do I do now? Like I'm out of high school, or maybe I didn't even graduate high school, but what the hell do I do? I'm 18, 19, 20. I have no money. I have no girlfriend, and I need to get money so I can get a car and then get a girlfriend. And so everything kind of starts revolving around this cycle of like money, getting a girlfriend, that requires having a car. And so so I think when it comes to like men and toxic masculinity, that's where we have to keep in mind that like for young men, money is highly desired. And the Republican Party is like totally open about that. I feel like the Democratic Party in a lot of ways doesn't talk about money in a good way. If they talk about it at all, it's the fact that the wrong people have it. We need the right people to get that money from the wrong people, and redistribution of income essentially. And so I think that is a heavy turnoff for young male voters who end up going Republican. Like by no means are these young male voters going to be Republicans unless the Democrats want to forfeit them, and they have. So if you're a 20-year-old guy, okay, let's say either way, if you're in college or not, you're trying to get girlfriends, you're trying to like get a nice car, either a car at all or a nicer car than what you got, so you can impress girls, try to get them, into you via your car. And I mean, this is how guys think. We were not complicated people. I was not a complicated person when I thought I was a 21-year-old man, and all I wanted to do was fly airplanes, drive what I thought was a nice, cool car that would like attract women, and have enough money to like buy all the things, buy a big house, live where I wanted to live, which I knew wasn't going to be cheap. Which to me at the time, my dream location was like Southern California, probably like Orange County, and I wanted to like live near the beach or in the hills, something like that. And I think so. This is like how young men are thinking, at least if they're on the right track. If they're on the wrong track, well, they're either already in jail or um, they're developing very negative thought patterns that are going to take them down that path, usually into drug use or just dead end jobs that don't require much education. And yeah, I'm not as familiar with that path because I didn't take it. All I know is from what I read about and hear from others. But in my case, yeah, I mean, I can speak for myself. I can speak for my friend that I talk about who still lives in Florida. We went to college together and we were roommates for 2 years. He went to a different college though after the first year, but still close to where, still in Florida, close by. And I mean, yeah, money, material things are the way to men's hearts and women, the desire for women. Like it, unfortunately, the Republican Party, the fascist party now has completely fetishized all these things. And then, like, not even mentioning guns. Like, I was not into guns ever, and that was normal, I think, back then. Like, I never knew anyone that had a gun when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and this was in suburban Dallas, and then like Central Florida. I'm sure now that's different, unfortunately. So Um, yeah, so whatever new coalition and party we need to build, and I'm still of the opinion that the Democratic Party needs to just disappear. We need something brand new. We need something that's going to have a revolutionary quality baked into its DNA. And the Democratic Party was never really a revolutionary party. It's been a conservative party for far more of its existence. And that means conservative as in like anti-revolutionary, keeping the status quo. So yeah, like I talk a lot about the kids in Milwaukee, and I think the reason I keep using Milwaukee is because it's like, to me, the upper Midwest, even though it is still very white, it's a good, I think that's a good thing in this case, because we need the white males to somehow see themselves in whatever group we're trying to make here. And I can already hear the people saying, well, I'm sick of trying to accommodate white males, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's exactly what's turning them off. And if we appeal to white males, guess what? That's also going to transition down to Latino males and black males. They all think the same. Trust me. Like I was a 21-year-old guy, and trust me, it's not different between the races. When a guy is young, their mind revolves around like those three things I talked about. And yeah, so I know I covered a lot in this video, but it's coming up on 30 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and let things marinate. I would love to hear your thoughts. And I also think people that did grow up privileged should have a voice in this new coalition. That's another thing, is I feel like the Democratic Party has always shunned the voices that have come from privileged backgrounds, as if we don't count. If we grew up rich, that just means we're not democratic people at all. And that's not, couldn't be further from the truth. I think by growing up privileged, I am now actually far more able to see the how imbalanced things are, and that this pointless chase for money and material gain is so misguided. I grew up with almost everything I could have wanted, and trust me, it's not worth it. It's if that's what an adult person like gets out of bed for every day, I feel bad for them that that's all they're going to have at the end of their life. And I think they will too, but it'll be too late to make that change. So in a way, I consider myself privileged that I was privileged at a young age. And I also realized in my 20s that um, there were far more important things in life. And that's when I started the transition to the Democratic Party. So we can talk about that in the next one, maybe tomorrow, if not soon. So thank you again. I'd love to hear your thoughts or opinions. Did any of this resonate with you or not? We can talk about it. And lastly, but not leastly, please like, subscribe, share with anyone you might think likes this content from a 45-year-old transgender person with level 1 autism that's formerly known as Asperger's. And I have depression, anxiety, and bipolar too. But it's all pretty well medicated for now, so I can function for the most part. And see everyone soon. Bye.